Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a total pleasure to be with you.
I am holding up a beautiful cover of your book. Congratulations on
Yeah,
your
thank you.
book, Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness. And I got to tell you, as I was reading this, I was having like a visceral response
Mm,
to just how much suffering there comes with things like insomnia.
yeah,
Like your descriptions of what insomnia was like, brutal,
yeah,
brutal. And I don't have any personal experience with it. And it hasn't really been in my purview much. So it wasn't until I read your book that I began to just barely understand the magnitude and the challenge of what living with insomnia must be like.
yeah, yeah. I had never had anything like it before in my life. So
Yeah.
it was, I mean, I'd had, nights where I would like maybe not sleep for 2 or 3 hours,
Right.
but going day after day, like just trying to scrape out an hour or two for like months and months,
Wow.
it's like CIA level interrogation torture.
Right. Yeah. Torture, torture.
Yeah.
And so when I saw the tagline, Edge of Madness, I was like, girl, you were all
Mhm.
up in it.
I was a funny story about that is when the publisher, Simon and Schuster, they wanted that subtitle.
Uh-huh.
And I was talking with my brother and I was like, they want this subtitle and it's kind of intense. And he was like, yeah, but weren't you like losing your squash? And I was like, yeah, I guess I was. Like the cheese was sliding off the cracker
Yeah.
completely.
No, I mean, we were talking hallucinations and just the whole,
Yeah.
CIA level
Yeah.
of interrogation
40,
tactics.
I
Yeah.
think I think it's 48 hours, but it might be even less of no sleep.
Of
They
no sleep
consider
is
that
considered
advanced
torture.
torture.
Advanced
Yeah,
torture.
advanced as
Oh
opposed
my
to like
God.
the moderate, mild
Yeah.
torture.
I was thinking, isn't that just motherhood?
Well,
What?
for a while I thought that, but then I was like, I can't remember
Yeah.
what's happening one day to the next.
No, I want to get into it. I have like so many little, like, for those that are
You
not
know, the,
watching the YouTube, I suggest you watch the YouTube because it's fun. But yeah, I have so many things. I ran out of tabs and had to start earmarking pages, but well, the book is beautifully written.
oh,
Congratulations. You
thank
did
you.
did a good job. You did a
Yeah,
really good
thank
job.
you.
And I can't wait to get into today's discussion because we're not only going to be talking about insomnia, we're going to be talking about I don't know what the real term is for it. I just kind of think of it as medically induced addiction,
Yeah,
right? And addiction being like you're on something and you want to get off and can't.
yeah,
It's something that's destroying your life.
yeah.
So I have heard many people come on and talk about, like I've had people come on and talk about Ambien addiction or,
Mm,
opiate addiction, people that were otherwise normal. And then one thing happens and they got prescribed opiates for 60 days and then they
yeah,
lose their lives,
right.
literally and figuratively both. But I wanted to so this isn't my typical format, but I wanted to share a story with you and my listeners because it was so relevant
Mm,
to our discussion. We're gonna be talking about some harm reduction stuff, and this is why I think it's so important. So I started this podcast a little over 7 years ago. And I had this dream. I was doing a sales podcast. I was a tech sales in Silicon Valley, and there wasn't a lot of women talking about tech sales. So I wanted to be the voice. And, but it was on my heart to do a recovery podcast.
mm,
But because of my community and some traditions from certain programs, I was afraid to be public about it.
mm,
And so anyway, I had this dream on my heart, but I had so much resistance. And then something tragic happened. A friend of mine who had been suffering from insomnia, I didn't know this until after. She was at a 6 a.m. meeting that I went to all the time called ODAT. That's how I named my podcast. She was at the 6 a.m. meeting and then she went to work and got in a single car accident and died. And she and I were just about the same age. She was only a few months older than I was. And she was like on the cusp. She had just graduated college. She got a great job. Like she had gone back to school and did all the things, right? Work full time, go to school. I mean, it was amazing what she was able to accomplish. And I just looked, it was so tragic. It was so sad. But I saw myself in her and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to let this dream of doing a recovery podcast die with me. Right. No, but death has a way of kind of clarifying the bullshit. Right. And whatever it was that I was afraid of, I was like, I'm just going to do it because I just felt so deeply called to do this. Mm. And it came out later that she had been suffering from insomnia. And it's almost like, and her judgment was impaired and she made a mistake while she was driving and it cost her her life. And that is the seriousness of insomnia. You are as impaired as if you had been drinking at times. Like it just seemed like it, right? In extreme cases, if you're driving with insomnia, it's like drinking and driving almost. And so and that's generalities. I don't, everybody's different, but, and then when I got your book and I read how painful it must have been to live this way, and the things that you had to do to try to cope, I was like, we really need to talk about this. I don't think I've ever had a discussion with somebody that, where they were transparent like you have been in this book. And so I just want to, on the outset, just thank you for being willing to discuss something that is kind of taboo in the 12-step world, I would say, where, abstinence is a very hard line, even though there's people on psych medications or other kinds of medications. So I really want to talk about, what your experience is like. You had 2 little ones, but let's start off with where did the insomnia begin?
So that story is pretty wild. And in retrospect, it's always in retrospect, it all makes sense. But at the time, I was trying to kind of handle everything. So there was sort of a 3-tier or a 3 I call it my personal Fukushima. So there was like the earthquake, which was the birth of my son who is dual disability. He's got Down syndrome, and has also been diagnosed with autism. So I was suddenly like, whoa, I hadn't expected, like, I have never even met someone with Down syndrome. How am I going to know how to take care of this child? It was this whole new world. And then I got pregnant again, which was kind of the tsunami. And then I lost my beloved job as a magazine editor, which was just so fun. And so, I was living my dream of working with other writers and editing and writing on my own. And suddenly I was this like Betty Crocker CEO of the household with a child with a disability. And as I look back now, my marriage was already dissolving. It was just a disaster from the beginning, to be frank. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, but I was like,
You may
oh
not be
no,
alone.
I'm going to try to make this work. So, so all of those things combined, I woke up around 2 weeks into the pregnancy, and it was like that scene out of Pulp Fiction. I don't know if anyone's seen it, where Uma Thurman, whatever her character is like having a heroin overdose, and John Travolta like shoves a huge needle of adrenaline into her heart.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. I remember sitting up in bed. It was like 9 p.m. We'd put my son down, and I felt like this huge surge of adrenaline. And what we discovered later with testing was that I was having, my cortisol had flipped. Cortisol is your like get up and go, stress hormone. And I was having huge surges at night. We think it was the 2 pregnancies close together, but I literally was just like, I'd had a pot of coffee or 2 pots of coffee through the night, and it started just like that. And then it just continued. And the first night I thought, okay, this is like some weird pregnancy thing, but I'm so exhausted now, because I don't think I slept at all that first night. And the next night I was like, okay, I'm going to do the meditations. I'd been a meditator since I was like in my early 20s. I'm going to do all the things, right? And it happened the next night, and then it just kept going. And it was just this devastating. Within like a week or two, I was, like you said, I was dangerous on the road. I had a newborn, or he was 6 months old at the time. And no one could help me. I went to a naturopath. I went to a sleep clinic doctor, and they were all like, pregnancy is hard. We can't, you don't have sleep apnea. We can't medicate you. So good luck. Maybe do some art. That's what they told me. Do some art.
Oh man.
So yeah.
The story that you tell, can you tell the story about when you were in the nurse's office and you like started crying and you were like,
Yes.
you had been hallucinating already? And
So this poor nurse, she was not so I was in this nurse midwife's office, and she was not the nurse midwife that I loved. The other one was like, what I call hands deep. She was delivering another baby.
yeah.
So this nurse midwife comes in, she's young, she's got perfectly curled hair. She's like ready to type. She's like, so how are we today? And I'm like months into not sleeping, like almost at the end of my first trimester. And I am like, my hands are shaky. I can barely breathe. I have to like make a checklist for myself of like, okay, do I have my son? Like, have I left his little car seat on the pavement while I was walking?
It sounded like the lights were painful.
The lights were painful. My skin, like all of your nerves are just firing all the time. And so she sits down, and I know that I shouldn't tell her this. I know that I shouldn't like let loose, but I was like, look, Nurse Mindy or Nurse Sarah or whatever your name is, like, I'm going to ram my head into a concrete wall if you can't help me, because I haven't slept in 3 months. And she was like, ah, and she sort of like stood up and like backed out of the room and was like, I'm going to get someone else to help you.
We can laugh about it now.
We can laugh about it now, but I freaked her out because I was I was like, if you can't help me, I'm going to knock myself cold and smash my head in. That's how
sounded scary. Desperate.
Yeah.
It sounded scary. I mean, as you describe it in the book, like even just walking into the office, man, you describe it so well. I had like a visceral response, like I can almost smell the alcohol in the office, going to those offices, and it just smells a certain way. But just like the light sensitivity and just like words, hearing the words sounded painful. Like it sounded so painful. Just this whole like holding your shit together for so long. You're like you barely made it there.
Right. And having a 6-month-old to care for, and thinking, okay, has he been fed? Because he wasn't able to nurse because of his disability. So I had to pump, but there was just all of the things for a new mother. And, my husband at the time was just, he was working, but he was kind of checked out. And so, I was
sorry I'm going to keep interrupting you because I have so much to say. I'm so sorry. My audience is going to be like, stop interrupting. But I can't help myself because I was so mad on your behalf. Just the complete lack of empathy, because you kept telling him, I haven't slept.
Yeah.
And you meant literally.
Yeah.
And it felt to me like he was blowing you off, like you meant it figuratively, because he can't, like you mentioned, like, oh, I'm sure you got some sleep. And you're like, maybe an hour.
Yeah. Because he was sleeping. So he wasn't aware that I was awake all night.
But he should have, he should have been able to take one look at you and be like, oh my God, something is really not.
You are a wreck.
The lack of, what's the right word? But it was like a lack of care or a lack of sensitivity to your experience, or just a complete dismissal of your feelings. I was so mad for you.
Yeah. What I will say is that it became very clear, when you stress a system, you find out where the cracks are.
Right. Yeah.
And it was very clear that there was not a lot of stress that needed to happen. I mean, we had he also had experienced the Fukushima, he had experienced
Oh,
the
of course.
child
Yeah.
with
He
the
was in crisis
disability, and
too.
then me losing my job and him having the responsibility.
Yeah.
However, it is true that I found very quickly that his bandwidth for compassion and to
Compassion.
be able to really take care of someone who was desperately ill, from the
Yeah.
insomnia, was extremely limited, and he just checked out emotionally very quickly.
That was the word I was looking for, the lack
Yeah,
of compassion of
yeah,
what your experience must be like.
yeah.
And I'll say that you write about it so generously.
Mm,
Like I did not get that you like I didn't feel like you attacked him at all.
yeah,
Probably quite the opposite, where um you accepted so much responsibility, right? Which I
yeah.
really appreciate, I find it challenging to like work with people who are at the other end that are on the
Mhm.
victim spectrum where
Right.
they don't take any responsibility.
Yeah,
I really appreciate, and I have a lot of hope for people who almost take on too much responsibility because it's easier to back off of it than it is to get someone to accept responsibility.
right, right.
And I
Absolutely.
do want to acknowledge and honor the fact that he was having a hard time too.
Yeah,
And you so anyway, I just want to say that because I didn't get that you attacked him at all in the
yeah.
book. Like you were honest about your experience, but you were very generous towards him.
Well, that was my aim, was to write him as a human being.
Yeah,
We all have limitations.
yeah,
Unfortunately, this is his bandwidth for that kind of thing is just very, very small. And I was like, the whole time I was like, okay, where can I find compassion for him? It was really, really hard on from my end, but I
yeah,
wanted him to not, yeah, I didn't want to just vilify him.
right.
He was
He
struggling
was
as
him.
well.
And where was your did you have anger or did you I mean, because it sounded like there were several times where you were trying to get your needs met.
Yeah.
I mean, so many
Oh,
times you
yeah.
were taking, yeah, my
I
heart went
think,
out to you. You were trying to get some help and it just didn't come.
yeah. It was just survival mode at that for a long
A
time.
long
It
time.
was survival mode. So I would have these, especially once I got medicated, and the benzodiazepines, they kind of strip away any ability to kind of have that sort of navigation of the really intense emotional terrain that
Mhm.
I was going through. And so I would have these swings of just like rage and despair and like, oh, why am I even trying? Like I really should just off myself because this may never end. And I
Yeah.
had to really, I mean, it took like Herculean effort to remind myself my brain is on drugs that are stripping my humanity away, stripping my sense of self away. Like I know that I am not someone who wants to leave this life.
Right.
And I know I don't want to hurt anyone with the rage that I'm feeling. So I would go on these walks and I would let my imagination like work the rage out. Like
Mhm.
I had to use every skill in my toolbox to navigate all of the feelings that were just swinging wildly, you know?
And that was during the sort of lowest part of what I would consider to be like the addiction phase. Is
Right.
that fair?
That and then the withdrawal as well. Like, it was
Mhm.
a number of years because the withdrawal, your brain, my brain was not creating the
The
neurotransmitters that I
neurotransmitter.
needed were just not there because the GABA receptors, and this is getting a little technical, but it's like benzodiazepines are sort of an emergency brake. They halt everything. And when you take them out, then everything goes haywire. So it's
Right.
like all the
For a
feelings,
period.
yeah, your body's going crazy.
Let's walk back to what happens right after you go into that nurse's office and you're like, I'm
Scare
gonna
her.
run my head through the wall. How it sounded like it was shortly after, as in you started getting some relief with medication. Was it after your daughter was born that you got the
So that it was sort of a two-step. So
okay,
after my first trimester, they prescribed Ambien.
Ambien. That's
It
and you
might have
got
been
some
Ambien
relief.
CR, yeah, with Benadryl. And that
Right.
it was such a, getting medicated when you're pregnant is awful because you don't know what's the medication,
Ah,
what is the pregnancy. I was having all kinds of heart palpitations. I kept like, I would sort of joke and say like, I need a chaise lounge wherever I'm going because I feel like I'm going to pass out,
wow.
and I had the breakthrough waking. There was one night where I was like convinced I needed to drive to southern Utah, which is 4.5 hours away. And it was like 2 a.m. And luckily my husband at the time like heard me opening the door and was like, "What are you doing?
Where are you
Where are
going?
you going?" And I was like, "I
Yeah.
need to drive to southern Utah," and so it did give me, I think, enough sleep that I was not having a psychotic break. So I was getting
Right.
initially like 7 hours, and then it, slowly carved down to like 6 to 5 to 4.
Right. Oh man, I felt so bad for you. I remember reading that part because it sounded like you got a night of sleep and you were like, hallelujah. And I was like,
Right.
phew,
Whew, I feel like the cat in the hat of motherhood. I was like, I can do anything.
amazing. But then it slowly stopped working
Right,
and you were
right,
kind of right back where you were.
right.
So let's jump to where you met the doctor. I forget what you called him, Mr. Wonderful or Mr.
Dr.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Dr. Amazing.
Dr. Amazing. Yeah.
Tell me about meeting Dr. Amazing.
Wow. So I had heard about this guy, and I'd heard that he works both. He was a, typically a Western trained medical doctor, but also was really, really interested in holistic modalities. And, his whole website was like, we get to the root cause of dis-ease. So he was very like, had a statue of Ganesh, which is a Hindu deity of wisdom, like all the warm feelies, right?
Like, this is my guy.
I was like, great, we're on both sides of the fence. We can figure out what's going on, but he can also help me. And he just immediately was like, you are on this edge of a psychotic break. You've got to sleep. There's a sedative hypnotic that is amazing. And you will sleep, and then we'll start doing tests on your adrenals. He is the one that figured out that my cortisol was super, super high at night.
Okay.
And he kept saying to me, we need to fix your adrenals. And that once they are repaired, then you'll be able to sleep. But in the meantime, let's put you on this very high dose. It's called Ativan. It's in the family of
Ooh,
benzodiazepines. It's a new generation, which means I call them pharmaceutical hammers. So they basically pull out this pharmaceutical hammer and it's like you've gotten slammed in the head and you are out. However, what we know now is that, and I'm trying to think, this was back in 2011. So we didn't know as much, but the literature was definitely out there that it gets metabolized so quickly and exits the system that it creates, then the body really, really starts craving it to be able to function. So that's what happens. So he started me on 2 milligrams. Within about 6 weeks, my sleep had again gone down to 4 hours. I went to see him again. He said, let's just up your dose to 4 milligrams, which is a very hefty dose for your listeners out there. I,
okay.
once I started doing the research, I found out that when people have a grand mal seizure in the ER, they inject them with 2 milligrams
Oh,
of Ativan, and that just like the brain just goes silent. It goes dark.
okay. No, grandma seizure is like a flurry of electronic activity in the
Yeah,
brain.
you're having like a lightning storm in your
A
brain.
lightning storm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he started me at that dose and then got me up to 4 milligrams every night. He was like, take it every night right before bed, and I had delivered my daughter at that
Daughter.
time. So
Yeah.
he was like, make sure you like, nurse her, make sure she's been fed, then take your dose and it will be out of your system in like 6 hours. So initially it sounded great. I was like, oh my gosh, I'll be able to sleep. Are you kidding me? And then we can like slowly start to repair. But it just didn't happen. And again, after about 6 weeks, I went in. He was in Costa Rica somewhere somehow. And my memory now, I kept journals throughout
Yeah.
because I've
You're
always
a
been,
writer.
I'm a writer and I would write every day, especially because I kept thinking, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I need to be able to track every day what's happening, which
Oh,
ended up
okay.
being incredibly fortuitous because it enabled me
Wow.
to write the book.
Yeah.
But I went in one time, he was out of the country in Costa Rica, and his nurse was there, and she ended up putting a note in my chart to him, which I got my chart later, to him saying 4 milligrams is a very high dose. Something is going on. You need to have a conversation with her. And he never had that conversation. And I went to see him. Let's see, it started in February. July of that year was the last time I saw him, and he upped my dose to 6 milligrams of Ativan and gave me a concurrent prescription for Xanax, which he said I could just like take on the off days or something like that, which thank goodness I didn't end up doing that. I just somehow it felt to me like really wrong to, and and I
Yes, really
still
wrong.
didn't know enough about the drugs to really have any understanding of what they were doing. I was still, because my sleep would go up and then it would go down. So I was in that sort of, my cognitive abilities were really diminished. I was just barely making it through the day with two kiddos, two newborns basically, or
Yeah.
a newborn and then a 1.5-year-old.
Yeah, we call those Irish twins.
Yeah.
My family.
Yeah,
My family.
exactly.
Okay, so you're on a crazy amount. Are both Ativan and Xanax considered in the benzodiazepine family?
Yeah. Yeah, they're
They
both
are.
really the new generation, very, very fast. Xanax came out, I think 1987, and the company, I'm trying to remember which company it was, but they, um, there's a guy, Robert Whitaker, that wrote a book, amazing book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, and he sort of traced
Oh
the
yeah.
history. And the DSM-4, which is Diagnostic Statistical Manual of like psychiatric disorders,
Mhm.
they came out with panic disorder, and immediately the pharmaceutical companies were like, oh my gosh, we can rebrand this, high potency benzodiazepine as a treatment for panic disorder. And it's a really great way to get people using it chronically, even though their own testing showed that after about, I think, 6 weeks, efficacy really just plummeted.
After 6 weeks.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, six to
Yeah.
8 weeks. And then they really, really started to kind of tank and have like started to have side effects from the medication, and worsening insomnia, worsening anxiety. People had symptoms come up that they had never had before, like agoraphobia,
Oh,
tics, yeah, all kinds of like crazy things.
I mean, it's just so crazy that, doctors go into their profession to try to help, but
Right.
the pharmaceutical agencies or the companies are really all about profit. And they do want I think it was Chris Rock who used to joke around, they don't cure anything anymore. They haven't cured anything since polio. They just
Right.
create medications to help you live with stuff,
Right.
right? Because that's how they make money. And
Right. And they want people that are lifetime users,
lifetime users.
because that's where the profit is.
Yeah,
If
that's like
it's
the
something that
whole.
cures something, or if it's something that's just like a 1 time or 2 week thing, yeah, they don't
Yeah,
make a
there's
cent
not a
on
lot
it.
of not a lot of money in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
like the whole antidepressant, the whole SSRI
Oh,
pharmaceutical branch. It's all about living with. I remember going to this. I went to like a Tony Robbins event, and he asked how many people suffer with depression, and like half the hands went up. How
right.
many of you are on SSRIs? All everybody's hand went up. He goes, "How many of you are still depressed?" And most of the hands were still up.
Right.
They just,
Right.
yeah. And you
We
don't
are
want to
not
kill it. Yeah, you don't kill yourself, but you're still miserable. Like it's not
right.
really addressing root cause, like you were saying.
Right. The root cause. Yeah.
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 So okay, so you're on all this crazy medication. When did you decide like this is a problem and I gotta get some help?
So there was a very dramatic scene. I will never forget, because I had been, just as a quick bit of history, I trained as, like, I was training when I was a kid as an Olympic gymnast.
Oh
I was
wow.
sort of pre-Olympic gymnast.
Okay.
Um, And so I'm very strong, and I've always been very athletic, and, was a rock climber and a mountain biker, very like into the outdoors.
I saw your TED Talk. Your arms are amazing.
Oh, thank you. Right. And
Wow.
that's just all from being a kid, from the time I was
Right.
young, I was,
Yeah.
doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So physically very like healthy and robust. And I traveled to third world countries alone, when I was 18. Like I had always been, I'm only saying this to say that I was very healthy, very adventurous. I was successful in my career as a magazine editor. And um and then suddenly I had these two kids and started taking this medication, and everything collapsed. It was like it just went down the drain so quickly.
Mm.
So I was giving my daughter a bath. She was about a year old at this point, I think. I had, and my son was like falling asleep on the, beanbag out in the other room because I wanted to be able to hear him. And I picked her up out of the bath, put her little froggy towel on, and I was walking out of the bathroom, and there was sort of a hallway that led to her bedroom. And I remember taking a step, and it was like suddenly I was in water. I had no muscle control in my legs whatsoever. Like they just went to nothing. And I just fell. And I remember seeing this corner of the wall, from her bedroom, like my body was like careening towards this, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to split her head open. And so I had to like wrench my shoulder to the right and like fall on my back holding her. And I remember laying there, and we were okay. I'd like hurt my shoulder, and I was I was thinking, I have a brain tumor. This is the only thing that is explaining this. Or maybe I have multiple sclerosis because I've had like cognitive decline. I'm like not seeing things well. I'm having a hard time reading. I'm off balance all the time. I had bruises all over my body because I was constantly like falling in the grass outside or falling in the kitchen. And I suddenly, in that moment, and then about 45 seconds in, my legs just, oh, we're back online. Everything's fine, just like nothing had happened. And I thought, I suddenly had that moment of realization, like, this is not me. This is not just exhaustion motherhood. You don't fall in the hallway holding your infant daughter because you are just a tired mother. You don't have bruises all over your body because you're just a tired mother. And that's when I thought the one thing that has changed is the medication my doctor put me on.
Wow.
Yeah. And I
That was
went
the turning
upstairs.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. And finally started doing the research that I was used to doing as a reporter, or as a journalist, I should say,
Yeah.
but had been so sick and desperate that I just trusted my doctor. And I found all of the PubMed articles, saying these are not meant for long term whatsoever. And then found a site where a woman named Dr. Heather Ashton out of the UK had done tremendous amount of research, and all of the symptoms that they listed on that site.
Mhm.
It's I think benzouk.org.
Okay.
They said these are all withdrawal symptoms, and you can be taking the drug and still be in active withdrawal. And that's what was happening to me, because it exits the system so fast in that span of time where I was not taking it during the day to take care of my kids. I was in active drug withdrawals.
That is crazy.
It's crazy.
I never considered that you could. I didn't even know that. This is the first.
I
Well,
didn't know. I had
300
no
interviews and 30
I
years in
was
recovery. Never heard of this.
right. I was so well, and it kind of, I mean, I think it's true with other drugs. Like you get the hit, and then it wears off, and you feel crummy, and you want the hit again, and it's
Yeah, that's
kind of
true.
got a similar pattern. But for me, it was debilitating to the point. Not only did I feel like I had the flu all the time, and just felt like barely able to function. Like my joints all ached, my jaw ached, my eyes ached.
My
Just so
God.
many weird things. And I was just like, oh, I'm just tired. But I was
Oh,
not
just
tired.
chalking it all up to the insomnia
Motherhood.
still.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
And not
insomnia.
having people in your environment that would recognize or show compassion or concern or
Yeah.
alarm, frankly, for what you
Yeah.
were going through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
How did what was your journey like to getting, uh, well, not off of it. It's my
Right.
understanding you have to take a teeny tiny little bit still. Is
Right.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So
Oh,
I now take, and this is something that I really have had to come to terms with, and I'm still really hoping. I'm a single mom now, raising two kids who are teenagers and working full time. So the thought of going back into withdrawals is just terrifying to me. But
mhm.
um, I'm talking with a lot of clinicians and a lot of people that have done research on how I can do like a super extended micro taper. Um, However, right now I am on 5 milligrams of Valium, which was kind of the point that I got to right when my marriage just, finally I knew it was over. And the stress, like my body was just collapsing on those last five.
Mhm.
So anyway, so your question was the journey from that point of like, I this is the medication and I'm in active drug withdrawals, and what do I do? And
Yeah,
everything.
it sounded like total insanity
Yeah.
and lots of drugs
Right.
and medication. Sorry,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. Like, I
Yeah.
don't mean like, oh,
Yeah.
you're on lots of drugs, but you were on lots of prescription medication. And then like you not getting like at the doctor's isn't usually it's the doctor's like you have to stop doing this. Like they tell you you need to act right, or your family members being like you're not okay. Like you always hear
Right.
about like the intervention, like for
Right.
alcoholics and heroin
Right.
users, you get all that. It didn't sound to me like you were getting any of that.
No, there was, I mean, I think the way my husband at the time had dealt with it was truly like
Denial,
shutting down, total denial.
shut down. Yeah,
Total
that
shutdown,
is
total
a
denial.
dissociation is a trauma
Mm,
response. And
right, right.
yeah, so
Yeah,
he just
dissociated.
shut down,
Yeah, I
dissociated.
think that's a
Yeah.
perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It left you in this place where you had to come to your own conclusion that this isn't right. You started doing research. Is that when you kind of came to the conclusion
yeah.
like it has to change dramatically?
Yeah. So what I learned from my research is, first of all, you never cold turkey, because
Oh
the
yeah, kill
brain
you.
is basically, the way I describe it is, they're like the medication is like fish hooks in
Hmm.
your brain. And if you cold turkey, you are literally pulling those fish hooks out of your brain. And that, you are going to be doing damage to your brain. And so, and everything that I read said you've got to do a very, very slow taper. And what that looks like is you cut 10% of your dose, and then you wait until the withdrawals hit, and you have maybe a week of withdrawals, and then you slowly go back to a kind of equilibrium. Then you drop 10% again, and then you have like a long term of withdrawals. And you can have a period in there, and some people can go a little faster. A lot of people have to go even slower than that, because you can hit a point where your brain is like, nope, this is going too fast. So I had to hold a couple of times for about a month
Okay.
while my symptoms would, I'd be raging with symptoms, and but the first night, this was after I had kind of found an addictionologist to work with who could really guide me on, we have to check in on your symptoms all the time, and have this be led by how you are doing. But he had the program.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could I ask you, I'm not really familiar. So with the addictionologist, is that like a board certified addiction specialist?
Yes,
That type? Okay, gotcha. I'm with you
because I
now.
had worked with a doctor that I had found, who a friend had recommended, and she was just very compassionate and
Hmm.
very open. And
Hmm.
I thought, she will allow me to do a patient-led taper and support me.
Hmm.
We tried that for about 5 months, and she didn't have the knowledge of exactly how to work with the chemistry that I really needed to transfer from 6 milligrams of Ativan to 60 milligrams of Valium, which is a massive,
Um,
That's the equivalent, because Valium
Oh,
takes
6 milligrams of Ativan is equal to 60
60.
milligrams of
Yeah,
60.
60. That is what
Wow.
I've been taking for a year and a
Okay.
half,
A year and a half. A year and
which is
a
just
half.
mind blowing. I mean,
Okay.
it's just mind
Wow.
blowing.
Your poor body. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. She didn't have that
she didn't
information.
have that information
Was she a
that
doctor?
oh yeah, she was a doctor,
Oh,
but
okay.
you know,
Okay.
she wasn't a
Listen.
specialist. She was an
Yeah.
internist. She didn't,
An
you know,
intern.
that she knew that the equivalency, but she didn't realize that Valium takes longer to exit the body, so you don't have those quick
Got it.
withdrawal symptoms. So
Okay.
you switch over to Valium, so you just kind of mitigate the withdrawal symptoms, and it makes them somewhat bearable.
What was the time frame from starting the process to where you are now, or to where you got to 5 milligrams, let's say?
I would say, so I worked with the first doctor for about 5 months, and we would go down and go back up and go back down and go back up because I was having seizures.
Oh,
It was
seizures.
clear. Oh yeah, it was clear that my brain was just not, like, when I say it wasn't just uncomfortable, it wasn't that I was like,
You were
oh
having seizures. That's
yeah, I
serious.
was having seizures, vomiting, like I was falling. I mean, I would
Okay.
have blackouts where my eye muscles, something would happen with my eye muscles and my vision would go black, which is not great if you're trying to drive kids around to like a little gym. You know?
My God.
So
Yeah,
so
so
I worked with her.
dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked with her for 5 months, and then I'm pretty sure I worked with my addictionologist for just over a year.
Did you get frustrated with her? Was she frustrated with you that you felt the need to change doctors, or it just wasn't
No,
working, or?
no, she was really amazing. She was very
Mhm.
kind. The whole time she was just, it was a learning process for her, and she was thankfully incredibly humble and very open about it.
Oh,
She
nice.
said, you know, she was like, I don't know how to get you off of this. She looked through her entire network of doctors nationwide, and she was like, everyone is telling me to just go slow, which we're doing, and it's not working.
Yeah,
And
because you were
so,
having seizures, and that's one of the things I want to call out.
yeah,
There's people are really, there are some people in the recovery communities that are like all about abstinence, or
yeah,
if you just work a program, or if you're spiritual practice, there's some sort of surrender that needs. No, you're having seizures.
right.
Like, that's not the same thing.
Yeah,
Like, this is a medical condition that needs to be treated with medical advice from
right,
specialists, is what I want to
right.
call out.
Right, because I mean, they're doing research now, and there's a new, I don't remember what it stands for. There's a new disorder that they have named called bind, which basically they have seen proof that benzodiazepines truly do cause brain damage. There's structural brain damage that
Permanently
happen,
altering.
permanently alters the structures of the brain.
Okay.
So, you know, so it's
Yeah,
not just the
meditation is going to cure
desire.
that.
Yeah,
A
it's not,
level of
I could decide.
surrendering to your
Yeah,
higher power isn't going to cure that.
right. Like, I can't be having a seizure and be like, just hold on. You know,
Let me meditate for a minute.
I'm gonna meditate. Yeah.
I haven't surrendered my
Enough.
self-will.
Right.
I haven't surrendered
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I keep calling that out because I just feel so strongly that, and you said, what you said that really got me was the doctor had a degree of humility.
Mm,
And just so aware of the mentality that's like, you have to do abstinence. We don't take anything no matter what. I'm aware that that is helpful for some people, but this is a whole different animal that we're
they're
talking about.
all different animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
anyway,
The level of physical and emotional suffering.
yeah.
What I
Oh,
would say, I mean, I think for anyone that is, tries to get off of anything, it's really, really profound.
yeah.
However, the duration with benzodiazepines is longer than anything I have ever heard of, because it can take people years to get off. And so you are navigating consistent, very intense withdrawal symptoms,
For
that go on
years.
day after day after day.
Whew. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. So I am now understanding why, you know, this process can take so long, and you have to be so committed to the process. And, you know,
Yeah.
so this is really interesting because before we started recording, I was like, we might have to talk about some uncomfortable things because I don't understand. But
Right.
now I'm beginning to understand. Like when you frame it in the context of brain damage, permanent brain damage,
Yeah.
and a permanent change in your your neurology and
Right.
mental
Brain structure. Right.
brain structure, thank you.
Mhm.
Now I get it. Now
Yeah.
I get it. Because that's a whole different animal. And I think people really need to be aware of that in the recovery community. Because
Yeah.
we talk about harm reduction, and I
Right.
know that this is like right up your alley, right? The whole
Yeah.
harm reduction part. So
Yeah.
what would you say to somebody that is really struggling with wanting to get off, but they're in these communities that are sort of touting this abstinence and they're experiencing shame around not being able to
Oh.
get off? Like, how do you support somebody like that?
Oh, you know what? I describe shame as like a second sword to the suffering that you're already experiencing. Like
Yeah.
shame, anyone that has a should around um, a program,
Mhm.
I think behind that should is shame. And
Yeah.
while they're a tremendous in the recovery community, there's so much help and there's so much goodness that happens on trying to keep people committed to a program.
Mhm.
If that commitment becomes dogmatic, and there are a lot of shoulds, especially when it's sort of a misunderstood drug like benzodiazepines,
Yeah.
then it's just a second sword to someone who is really trying hard
Yeah.
to get off of drugs that are causing innumerable like physiological changes and disorders.
So
So
it's not the same thing.
yeah,
Healing from different types of addiction
yeah,
is different. And
it's yeah,
we talked earlier about the difference between, I think it was dependency and addiction, because
right.
maybe the terminology doesn't really, it needs to be different in this realm of benzodiazepine. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I think I do want to say that anyone that's recovering from any kind of substance abuse or, where um, there's always pain underneath. And so for
Always,
me, there needs
always.
to be just this umbrella of compassion
Yes.
regardless. And
Yeah.
yes, a lot of times with benzodiazepines, um, it has been people that have just followed their doctor's orders. This is what we've seen with the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
They've followed their doctor's orders, and then suddenly, if they don't take the medication, they have severe, acute,
Yeah.
debilitating withdrawal symptoms. That's very different from sort of our Western version of addiction, where people are using maybe to help the suffering of some kind of psychic pain or something else. So
Mhm.
they are different. However, the way in which we, I think, discuss them has to be with compassion, because there's suffering and there's what we do to try to remedy that suffering. And we're all just human in that.
Yeah, I think compassion and no small degree of humility,
Yeah,
because nobody knows what anybody else's experience is really like.
right,
Like I
right.
can empathize, and like I get it, but I don't know what it's for. Like I've never been addicted to or had an
Yeah,
issue with
right,
benzodiazepines. So I have to trust you that you know what's right for yourself. And you
right.
seem
And
I mean, everything about you strikes me as somebody who's deeply committed to healing.
mm, oh, absolutely.
And you're so high functioning, being able to write a book and take care of the kids and working full time. Oh my God, I'm exhausted.
Well, and this is what I mean, this is why I was so committed to writing the book. I kept asking myself, I would sort of ask my higher power, right? I was like, do I really need to write this book? Because it was anguish going through. Why would I want to
Oh my
write it?
God.
Why would I want to go through it again? I want to return to being a writer. That's my soul work. That is where I connect with the divine.
Yeah, I
And I
get
would
that.
ask every day, okay, do I really need to write this book? Because I'm going to be exposing things, it's a memoir. It's going to be the most vulnerable thing I've ever done. And
Gonna piss
every
some
time it
people
was
off.
like, It'll piss some people off, which it has,
I'm sure.
but I thought I I am not the only one who's going through this. And if I can help other people and
Oh,
if I can
yeah.
bring greater understanding and greater
There it is.
compassion, it is worth it.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is. That's really, I mean, it sounds like a calling. It's like something you can't
Right.
not do.
Yeah. I could not do it.
Oh, I'm so glad you did it. I mean,
Oh, thank you.
just because I was telling you before, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what insomnia must have felt like. And so your description was so vivid. I was like, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
And then you weren't somebody that struggled with drugs and alcohol
Right.
like the way I did, right? So you were good until the insomnia hit, and then the doctor sort of medically induced addiction thing,
Right.
substance use disorder happened,
Yeah.
and then it all went to shit, it all, and then once it was, once it all, and I was like, oh, I identify with that, pain
Yeah.
recognizes pain, so I was like, oh, I know what that feels like.
Right.
We got there in different ways, but then result was the same.
Right.
We go to that dark place of wanting to die.
Yep.
Nothing's working.
Yep.
The complete unmanageability, as they
Right.
say. I was like, okay. So I was tracking with you through the whole book, and and thank you for helping me to understand that these drugs cause brain damage that you can't, spiritually heal your way out of.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about because you did mention a higher power. Can you share with me like what your concept of a higher power is?
So I think, my whole life I was raised pretty tabula rasa, no religious upbringing, but
Great
from
word.
from an
Tabula.
early age, I had a real strong sense that there was, I just knew there was so much more than what I could see.
Mm,
I could feel it. I had um several experiences where, either with dreams or sensing something that I was like, and I know with our modern physics, we know that, we
yeah.
see like what 0.0035 of the
Yeah.
visible light spectrum. There is so much more out there.
Yeah.
So as I grew up, I would try kind of different religious teachings and would try certain things on. And I feel very like in alignment with Ram Dass, the
Oh,
you know formerly known as
yes.
Richard Alpert, great spiritual teacher, in that every religion for me speaks to a core set of values, and um so those core values are what I hold to, but I also have that sense of, and it really is a humility that there is no way I have enough information to believe that this is the end all be all. There is so much more out there, and
Yeah.
just that sense of wonder
Yeah.
and that communication with that great vast repository of awe, that is what I call the divine. And I will, and I do what is called, what people would say is praying now. I will ask specific questions as if there are people or spirits out there. I don't think there's just one, but there is something, and I feel like I'll get answers. And maybe I'm tapping into something in myself, maybe not, but I hold that wonder and awe as like my pillars. So that's the divine for me.
I love that, by the way. That was so beautifully said. How
Yeah.
do you know, like when you ask questions, how do you know you got your answers? Is it like obvious or do you feel it?
I love this question. It's such a good question. There's just this like there is just this like knowing, this clarity. There's not like oh, is that right? There's just this like, yep, this is
Do you
okay.
feel it inside?
I feel a deep like boom, like something is just going
Wow.
boom and it settles. And sometimes it'll take a while,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
do I have that sensibility? Do I have that feeling? I don't know yet, but when it comes in, like and I also know because everything in me is driving in that direction. Like with this book,
Mm,
I didn't have a job. I was getting a divorce. I had 2 kids I had to take care of. I had no clue what I was going to do. I should have just gotten a job, you know, like that would have been the rational thing to do. But no, I'm going to start a Kickstarter to fund a, very cheap living so I can write this book that may never get published. I mean, there was no rationale behind it. It was not a logical decision, but I knew I had to write it.
Yeah, knew that you had, yeah. So I think I might have shared with you that I'm writing a book called The 12-Step Exploration Guide. I'm still working on the tagline,
Yeah.
but I have tried to put this down so many times, but I keep talking to people because of the podcast. I talk to people and I'm like, there is so much misunderstanding about it that it feels like a calling, that I can't not do it.
Yep.
And just like you, I know people are going to be mad at me on both sides, but I have to do it.
Right. And you had, and that's, I remember thinking, there's no way once I take a stand, once I speak out to what it feels so true and so important, of course, then people are going to have their reactions. And that's not my responsibility. My responsibility
Right.
is to be as true and as
Mhm.
humble and as compassionate as I am able to at this point in my life.
And during your writing process, like, did you come to, I'm kind of coming to some kind of conclusion. As my husband even asked me this morning, how will you define success? And I feel like, and I wonder if you had to come to this conclusion that it just needed to be something that, it stayed true, but at the end, something that you were proud of.
So this is where I'm going to bring in Brene Brown because we
Oh
talked about
yeah, I
her
know. I love
earlier.
her. I have her book right here. I was
Oh
like,
my,
oh, I'm going to refer to. Isn't this book
so
beautiful?
good.
If you're not
Yep.
watching YouTube, I'm holding up the book.
Yeah, it's
So
such a
beautiful. Okay, so what were you going to say about
so
Brene Brown?
she talks about, and I'm paraphrasing here because it hit me
Deep.
so beautifully, that true art is something where we take in our pain and transform it into something beautiful so it can be used by other people. And that for me is what defines success. I wanted to write the book not simply as like a tragic story. I mean, it has a happy ending because I'm alive and functional, but
Yeah, doing really
I
well.
wanted, yeah, I wanted it to be gripping and I wanted it to be as beautiful as I could make it. I used all of the poet, facets
Yeah, you
inside of
did.
me, I put into it, and I was transforming the agony I'd gone through into something as beautiful as I could make it. And that feels
Yeah.
like success to me.
Can I just, you were talking about the poetry of your writing, and
Yeah.
I just opened one of the many tabs and I have highlighted, but the photos lodge in my memory along with deep sense of betrayal for which I have no words. It's just
Mm,
like the way you write, I just found it so beautiful.
mm.
Another
Thank you
thing
so much.
I have highlighted, oh my gosh, when you were talking about getting the diagnosis of your son, and
Mm,
people were having a response. Oh my God. And I quote, so I'm reading from the book, the worst is a friend's awkward, I'm sorry, as if a mistake had been made, as if my boy himself is broken. I tell myself my friend doesn't know what to say, that perhaps his expression of regret is because of the difficulty of the situation, but the sting remains. And even worse is the knowledge that if the roles were reversed, I could have easily said the same thing.
yep.
I mean, it gives me chills. Like
Tears to my eyes.
I had your
So,
writing was so beautiful, just
mhm.
describing these experiences that you were having.
Mhm.
And I could just see how, like, if you have this gifts have, I'm learning that gifts have to be expressed.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, you definitely have a gift
Yeah.
for writing. And I'm
Um,
so glad you were able to get this book written.
thank you.
Um, your mission is so clear, right? You transformed your pain into something that will help other people.
Yeah.
Um, where are you now in terms of, offering support or help to others in this community? We were talking about the sort of, it seems like the benzodiazepine has its own community because
Yeah.
like the nuances are very different in recovery.
Yeah.
So how do you support, how do you suggest somebody, I don't even know how to ask the question, but it's like, as you're walking this journey of recovery, how do you guys help each other?
There are, so the last decade, I think, since I've been through it, there's been a real explosion of information, and I've been waiting for it. That is in this country. There was a lot of information in the UK. So there are a lot of online resources. There are still doctors. Anytime anyone sends me an email, I always respond. Like, I have a lot of people that write me that have read my book.
Wow. Oh my gosh,
A lot
brace
of them
yourself,
are.
girl.
Well, it's just, to me, I reached out to a couple of people when I was in it, because I felt so alone. I was like, I don't know how to get off of these drugs. That's crazy.
Right.
And so when I found out people that, had done that, like the writer Matt Samet that I talk about, he wrote a book. He was a rock climber and he got addicted to them. And I use the term addicted because he was using them
Okay.
outside of kind of his doctor's prescription. So he
Okay.
kind of, there's a gray zone, there
So
can
you're
be,
not opposed to the term addicted.
well,
There is
I
a
think,
place for it, or
yeah, I think, for him, he speaks to that himself. He calls
okay.
himself an addict because he would use it more than was prescribed.
Got
He
it.
would use it to try to, like, he would take an Ativan and then go climbing because it would calm his nerves, so that's a different way of using it than, and
Okay.
not altogether. His story is just as complex and nuanced as anyone else's, but he struggled tremendously to get off. And so I reached out to him and he responded and was like a light in the dark for me.
Mm.
And so if I can be that for someone else, there's a young man I'm working with who I just did an interview with on my Instagram account named Sam Thompson, 31-year-old man, very bright, incredibly sensitive. His psychiatrist right now is trying to pull him off. He's been cold turkeyed twice in a hospital, tried to commit suicide in the hospital because that method is so devastating to the brain. He had a psychotic break in the hospital under doctors' hands. So it's still very much, the information is still like making its
Disseminating.
way into the mainstream. So there's an organization called the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. They have a list of doctors that support a patient-led taper. So what I try to do is get people to the place where the resources where they can find the clinicians that they need to work with appropriately and get the information that they need, because there's still plenty of clinicians, doctors, therapists that are unaware of how devastating this kind of dependency and or addiction can be.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find a doctor who is educated and
Mhm.
understands and has experiences. And
Yeah,
I would say that they are in the minority.
yeah,
I would say they might
still,
be hard to find.
yeah,
Um, so I'm going to put some resources in the show notes.
great.
But do you have, if someone wants to reach out to you to ask
Yeah.
you questions or get pointed in the right direction, I have some ideas for you too. Maybe we'll have to talk
We
offline.
can chat later. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking you need a website that has like an FAQ page or letters.
Oh, that is a great idea. So
Girl.
so my
Yeah.
website is melissaabond.com. And that is brilliant. I can't believe I haven't thought about that before, but I will add that to my
Okay.
website.
Yeah.
You can contact me through there because I can
Okay.
also, send people links to really, really helpful online resources.
Hmm. Or maybe it'll have like a start here
Yeah,
with all that stuff.
right.
I've often thought about putting up something on one of my websites that's like, questions that I get, like an FAQ, but like letters I get and the way
Yeah.
just my responses.
Mm,
It could be like a whole blog site, where people can
right,
share their stories or whatever.
right. Oh, I
Um,
love everything you're saying.
yeah, okay, so melissaabond.com. Okay, you're gonna have a FAQ,
Yeah.
TBD.
TBD. And then my Instagram account is at Melissa B Author.
Melissa B. Author.
And
Okay.
those are the accounts that I monitor the most. And I post to Instagram a lot. My paperback is coming out in August. And here's the
Okay.
big reveal. There's a new chapter I don't think I've even told you this yet.
Your
There's a
publicist
new
is sending it to
chapter
me.
where, they asked me to write a new chapter, and I was like, what, do I say how I'm doing now? Like I'm really healthy and vibrant, and
Yeah.
that's great. But I was like, what is undone? And I thought, oh my gosh, I never returned to Dr. Amazing. I don't know if he knows I wrote a book, and he should know that. He's in my town. So I went to his
He's
over
still in
Christmas.
practice, from what I've read in your at the end, right?
Yeah, still in practice. I went to his clinic and brought a little orange gift bag with my book in it and waited for him to come out into the waiting room. And I said, I have a Christmas gift for you. Did you know I'd written a book? And he said, why no? I had no idea you had written a book, which was kind of shocking because I've been in like the local papers and I was on the local, radio. And I said, I want to give you this book. Do you remember treating me? And he was like, oh yeah, I remember. And I said, would you please read this book? And I'd love to have a conversation with you after you read it about, everything, because we were in the waiting room, and I didn't
Right,
want to,
right. Yeah, yeah.
also didn't want to make him uncomfortable, but I
You
wanted
don't want
to
to cause a
get a
scene.
commitment. And he said, I will read it and I'll be in touch. And I thought,
He'll
we'll
never
see.
call me.
Right.
Yeah.
He called me within a couple of days and said, I'm halfway through the book. I want to talk to you. And so the new chapter is about that. And it is about us getting together and talking for a number of hours about everything, about why he had prescribed such high doses, what his thinking process was. It was
Ah,
unbelievable and very scary.
why is my heart
Initially,
pounding?
it was very scary. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so do you feel peaceful?
Yes. I
Do you
totally
feel like
had that,
he
like,
understands?
yep.
Because I thought I read somewhere that at the end that you had him investigated, but they didn't do anything.
Yep. Yep. And they said they had him investigated, but what I know is that they called his office, never talked with him, never talked with my addictionologist, because I was asking them,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Dr. James, did you ever talk with the investigator? And he was like, nope, they called the office, left a message, and that was it. Like, tried to get a hold of him. So they closed the case without really investigating. They just made a couple of phone calls.
That's outrageous. I hope he changes his practice.
I think he
Who
will.
else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who else? I mean, how many other, I'm just going to say it, how many other addicts has he created? How many other people are suffering
Right.
alone and in silence? And
Right.
you know what, Melissa? You are that light in the dark. I mean, this book is really beautiful and you are that light. And the right person is going to hear this and know that they're not alone and they're
Yeah.
going to reach out and get some
Yeah.
help. And
Yeah.
that's why I do this.
Yeah.
We got to get the word out. It's so
Gotta get the word
beautiful.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. This was really educational for me. I really learned a lot from you and have a whole different perspective on, harm reduction.
Yeah.
It was on the marijuana maintenance program when I got first sober, and that was a little bit different.
Right. Yeah,
And
different needs.
yeah. And there was a lot of discussion about it, but I had not yet heard this discussion of what I really needed to understand was that it's different. This is different.
Right.
So thank you for clarifying that in such a loving, compassionate way.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, we are all humans trying to make our way in the
Yes.
most, best way
Strange
possible.
trip this is.
Strange.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to watching your success as you get the word out.
Yeah, likewise. Look forward to, you getting your book out as well.
We'll see. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.